My grandfather left me $500K in his will, but my parents demanded I give it all to my favorite sister. So I showed them years of messages, and it broke them. I'm 28 years old. I work in finance at a pretty big company, and I need to tell this story because what happened 3 months ago with my grandfather's inheritance basically destroyed what was left of my relationship with my parents, but at the same time freed me in a way I never imagined. I guess I should start at the beginning, because actually this story doesn't start with my grandfather Albert's death, but much earlier, when I was like 6 years old and my sister Samantha was 3. My first clear memory that something was wrong was on my 7th birthday. My parents, Nicholas and Kimberly, threw me a small celebration with a store-bought cake and maybe 5 or 6 friends from school. It was nice, don't get me wrong, but 3 months later it was Samantha's birthday, and my parents hired a bounce house, a clown, there were like 30 kids invited, and a huge 3-tier cake with her favorite Disney character. I remember asking my mom why Samantha's party was so different from mine, and she said something like, "It's just that Samantha is younger and needs to feel special," which even at that age seemed weird to me because, didn't I need to feel special too? But anyway, that was just the beginning. When I was like 10 years old, I saved my birthday money and money from doing extra chores for months, literally months, to buy myself a bicycle. It was a used bike I found at a garage sale. Nothing special, but it was mine, and I'd gotten it through my own effort. A week later, Samantha saw my bike and threw an epic tantrum at my parents because she wanted one too. You know what happened? The next day, my parents came home with a brand new, shiny bicycle, way better than mine, for Samantha. When I asked them why she got a new bike without having saved anything and I had to buy a used one, my dad told me I already had mine and should be happy with what I had. Like, seriously? Things continued like this throughout my childhood. In 8th grade, I got the lead role in the school play. I'd rehearsed for months. I was super excited. And on the day of the performance, Samantha told my parents her stomach hurt. It wasn't anything serious. Honestly, I think she just wanted attention. But my parents decided to stay home with her and miss my play. My grandmother Frances was the only one who attended, and I remember seeing her sitting alone in that audience, full of families, and feeling a mix of gratitude toward her and horrible sadness. After the play, when I came home all proud because it had gone really well, my parents barely asked me how it went. They were too busy pampering Samantha who, surprise, surprise, no longer had a stomachache. The pattern continued in high school. When I was 16, I got a partial scholarship for a summer program at Harvard, like an amazing opportunity that could help me get into a good university. The program started on a Saturday, and I needed someone to take me to the airport early in the morning. Turns out that same day, Samantha had a dance recital at 3 in the afternoon. I asked my parents weeks in advance to take me to the airport. The flight left at 8 in the morning. They'd have plenty of time to get back and make it to Samantha's recital. But my dad said no, that they needed to help Samantha get ready for her recital and that I could take an Uber or ask a friend. I ended up paying for a super expensive Uber to the airport with money I'd saved, while my parents stayed home helping Samantha with her makeup and hair for hours before a recital that literally lasted 20 minutes. When it came time to apply to colleges, I worked really hard. I had an almost perfect GPA, extracurricular activities, amazing recommendation letters. I applied to several good universities and got admitted with a full scholarship to a pretty prestigious university in Boston. When I gave my parents the news, like super excited because I was going to be the first in my family to go to a university of that level, my mom said something like, "That's nice, honey," and kept watching TV. Literally, that was it. Not even a celebration dinner or anything. 3 years later, when Samantha finished high school and announced she wasn't going to college because she wanted to find herself, my parents organized an entire family dinner to celebrate her courage to follow her own path. I still remember sitting at that table thinking, are you kidding me? During college, I basically became emotionally independent from my parents. I called my grandmother Frances every week. She was my real source of support. But with my parents, I maintained the minimum necessary contact. I graduated with honors, got an amazing job in finance, worked like crazy, and at 27 I was able to buy my own house, an achievement I was super proud to reach. When I told my parents, My dad said, "Oh, that's nice," and then immediately changed the subject to talk about how Samantha had started selling handmade jewelry on Etsy from the basement of the family home where she still lived. There was no recognition that I, you know, had built a successful career completely on my own, without their financial or emotional help. The thing is, I'd gotten to a point where I didn't expect anything from my parents anymore. I'd made peace with the fact that Samantha would always be their favorite, and it was okay because I'd built my own life, had my own success, and didn't need their validation, or so I thought. Then my grandfather Albert died 3 months ago. My grandfather was an amazing man, like one of those old school guys who believed in hard work and justice. He'd made his fortune with a construction business he started from nothing, and he was always fair with everyone. Unlike my parents, he treated Samantha and me exactly the same. He took both of us fishing, asked us about our lives with the same interest, and always made us feel equally valued. His death devastated me. Honestly, it was one of the hardest losses of my life because he'd been more of a father to me than my own father. The will reading was 2 weeks after the funeral. We were all there. My parents, my grandmother, Frances, Samantha, me, and the other 2 executors my grandfather had named, besides my dad. The lawyer started reading and, basically, my grandfather had left the family home to my grandmother, some investment properties divided among various family members, and then came the part that would change everything. My grandfather left $500,000 for me and $500,000 for Samantha, in exactly equal parts. The will was super clear about it. There was no ambiguity whatsoever. I remember in that moment, I felt a mix of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because my grandfather was gone, and gratitude because even in his death he was showing that he did value me, that he did see me. I looked at Samantha and she seemed equally surprised. We'd never talked about money with our grandfather, so neither of us knew what to expect. My parents had weird looks on their faces but didn't say anything there in the lawyer's office. 2 days later, my mom called me and said they needed to talk to me, to come to the family home that weekend. I thought maybe finally they were going to acknowledge something. I don't know. Maybe the fact that my grandfather had left us that inheritance equally because we were equal in his eyes. How naive I was. I arrived Saturday morning, and both my parents were sitting in the living room with Samantha. My dad got straight to the point, didn't even offer me coffee or anything. He told me they'd been thinking about the inheritance, and that the fair thing, according to them, would be for me to give my entire share to Samantha. Just like that. Like it was nothing. I asked him what. Like I wasn't sure I'd heard right. And my mom started with her usual speech about how I already had a good job and a house, that I was doing well financially, while Samantha didn't have any of. Is that and needed the money more than I did. I told them no, obviously. I explained that grandfather Albert had been very clear in his wishes, that he'd divided the money equitably because he loved us both equally, and that I was going to respect those wishes. My dad turned red, literally red with rage, and told me I'd always been selfish, that I only thought about myself, that Samantha was my sister, and I should want to help her. The irony of that, coming from him, was almost comical. I told him that if Samantha needed help, they could give her part of their own inheritance, that grandfather had left them something too, but that my part was mine and I was going to keep it. The conversation got horrible. My mom started crying, saying I was destroying the family. How could I be so cruel to my sister? Samantha was sitting there not saying anything, just looking at the floor, which frustrated me even more because she didn't even have the courage to defend me or say the arrangement seemed fine to her. I left that house swearing I wasn't going to give in, no matter how much pressure they put on me. A week later, I got a call from the estate lawyer. Turns out my dad, as one of the executors, had sent a formal letter saying he was going to redistribute the inheritance funds to give all the grandchildren's money to Samantha because she needed it more. He said he was acting in the best interest of the family and was sure that's what my grandfather really would have wanted. I was frozen. Was my own father trying to steal my inheritance? Because that's what it was. Theft. Period. The lawyer told me that technically my dad had certain power as executor, but what he was trying to do was extremely irregular and probably illegal, given that it went directly against the explicit instructions of the will. He recommended I talk to a lawyer, specializing in estates, immediately. I hung up the phone and the first thing I did was call my grandmother, Frances. My grandmother was furious when I told her, like I'd never heard her so angry. She told me not to worry, that she was going to take care of this, and that Albert had been very specific about his wishes precisely because he knew my dad and knew he might try something like this. I didn't understand exactly what she meant by that at the time, but it all made sense later. Turns out my grandfather had included an anti-contestation clause in his will, basically a section that said, if anyone tried to change or challenge the terms of the will in a way that wasn't in accordance with his express wishes, that person would lose any benefit they'd received and would be removed from any position of power over the will. My grandmother contacted the other two executors and the main lawyer, showed them what my dad was trying to do, and they immediately voted to remove him as executor for obvious conflict of interest. The will was maintained exactly as my grandfather had written it. I was going to receive my full $500,000, and Samantha was going to receive hers. When my parents found out my dad had been removed as executor and the plan had failed, they organized an emergency family meeting. I didn't want to go, honestly, but my grandmother convinced me, saying I had to face this once and for all. The meeting was at my parents' house. There were like 15 family members there, aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandmother. My dad stood in front of everyone and started giving this speech about how I was a horrible, selfish person who was willing to let my sister suffer just to hold on to money. He said he'd always known I had a cold heart, that I'd never cared about family, and that this was definitive proof of my true nature. Like, the man was standing there defaming me in front of my entire extended family, trying to make everyone see me as the villain of the story. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and told him in front of everyone that he'd spent my entire life favoring Samantha, ignoring my achievements, minimizing my feelings, and that now he was trying to steal the inheritance my grandfather had left me, specifically because he, unlike my father, did value me. I reminded him of every forgotten birthday, every ignored achievement, every time he chose Samantha over me. The room went completely silent. My mom tried to interrupt me, but I kept going, years of frustration coming out all at once. I told my dad that if he really cared about Samantha and her well-being, he would have spent the last 25 years helping her build independence and confidence in herself. Instead of coddling her to the point where she's 28 years old, sorry, Samantha was 25 at the time, I'm 3 years older and still living in his basement with no direction in life. I told him the real problem wasn't that I didn't want to share my inheritance, but that they had failed as parents to both of us, just in different ways. My dad told me to get out of his house and never come back. I told him gladly, and I left. But before leaving, my grandmother stood up and told my parents something I didn't know. Turns out 2 years before he died, my parents had tried to convince my grandfather Albert to leave all the grandchildren's money to Samantha, using exactly the same arguments they'd given me. My grandfather had flatly refused, telling them both grandchildren were equal in his eyes, and he wasn't going to participate in the favoritism they showed. That's why he'd been so specific in the will and why he'd included that anti-contestation clause, because he literally anticipated my parents would try to do exactly what they did. After that disastrous meeting, I didn't talk to my parents for weeks. But I did talk to Samantha. I sent her a message asking her to meet me for coffee. Just the two of us. No parents involved. She agreed. I think she also needed to process everything that had happened. We met at a neutral coffee shop. Neither of us really knew what to say at first. Finally, I asked her directly why she'd never said anything in my defense. Why she'd let our parents attack me without saying a word. She was quiet for a long time and then admitted something I never expected to hear. She told me she'd also suffered from the favoritism, just in a different way. That our parents never expected anything from her, never pushed her to be better or achieve things, and that had left her without tools to function as an independent adult. She said she was 25 years old and didn't know how to do anything because she'd always had mom and dad solving everything for her. She told me she'd seen all my life, how I worked super hard for everything I had, and that she'd secretly admired me but had also felt resentment because I made her look bad in comparison. She admitted the favoritism hadn't been fair to either of us, that it had robbed me of the love and parental support I deserved, and robbed her of the opportunity to develop as a complete person. It was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in our lives. I asked her what she wanted to do with her inheritance, and to my surprise, she told me she wanted to use it to go to college, something our parents had never encouraged her to do. She said she wanted to study graphic design, that she'd always been interested but had never thought she could do it because our parents always told her it was fine not to have academic ambitions. Seeing her there, finally taking control of her own life, made me feel hopeful for the first time in a long time. But of course, when Samantha told our parents she was going to use her inheritance to go to college and move into her own apartment near campus, they didn't take it well. Not well at all. My dad told her she was being manipulated by me, that I was turning her against them, that she was ungrateful after everything they'd done for her. My mom cried and told her if she left, she was going to break their hearts. Like, the same emotional manipulation as always, but now Samantha could finally see it for what it was. My dad even threatened to sell the family home, saying if neither of his children wanted them, then why maintain such a big house? It was pure drama and manipulation, trying to make Samantha feel guilty for finally seeking independence. But she stood firm, and I was incredibly proud of her. Samantha and I started meeting regularly, like every 2 weeks for lunch or coffee. It was weird at first, rebuilding a relationship that had never really been solid because of our parents, but little by little we found a genuine connection. Turned out we had more in common than we thought, and that without our parents' constant interference we could actually be real siblings. As for the inheritance, I used it responsibly. I completely paid off my remaining student loans, invested a good part in diverse investment funds, following the advice of several financial advisors, and donated $50,000 to mental health and family support organizations because, well, clearly it's something important. I also established a small scholarship fund in my grandfather Albert's name for first-generation students because I know he would have liked that. My mom tried to reconcile with me about 6 months after all the drama. She started therapy, apparently, and her therapist made her see some things about the favoritism and how it had affected the family. She apologized to me, which was weird because I never thought that day would come. It wasn't a perfect apology and didn't magically fix everything, but it was a start. We're still working on rebuilding some kind of relationship. It's complicated and there are a lot of hurt feelings on both sides, but at least she's trying. My dad, on the other hand, remains convinced he's the victim in this whole situation. The last I heard from him was like a month ago. My grandmother told me he told several relatives that his ungrateful children had abandoned him after everything he did for them. Honestly, I don't know if he'll ever understand the damage he caused or if he just doesn't want to see it. I've made peace with the possibility we'll never have a real relationship, and that's okay. I don't need his approval to validate myself anymore. What surprises me most about all this is how my grandfather's death, something so sad, ended up being the catalyst for positive things. Samantha is thriving in college, has her own group of friends, is dating someone who treats her well, and for the first time I see her really happy and confident. Our relationship as siblings is stronger than ever. And I finally got the closure I needed regarding my parents. Finally got to say everything I'd been holding in for years. My grandmother told me recently that my grandfather had confessed to her before dying that he worried that after he was gone, I wouldn't have anyone to defend me in the family. That's why he'd been so careful with the will, because he wanted to make sure, at least in that, I received what I deserved. I cried when she told me that, because even from the grave, my grandfather was taking care of me in a way my own parents never did. The other day, Samantha sent me a photo of her first major university project, an incredible graphic design she'd done for a fictional campaign. She was super proud, and I was proud of her too. She wrote to me afterward saying thank you for not giving in, because if I had given in and given her my inheritance, she'd probably still be in that basement, depending on mom and dad, without direction or purpose. And that's what my parents will never understand, that sometimes loving someone means letting them face consequences and build their own life, not solving everything for them and keeping them dependent forever. I'm not going to lie and say everything is perfect now, because it's not. There are still days where it hurts that my own parents, or at least my dad, chose favoritism and pride over having a real relationship with me. But there are still moments where I see functional families and feel a pang of sadness for what I never had. But there's also a strange peace in having closed that chapter, in knowing I did the right thing, respecting my grandfather's wishes, and standing up for myself after a lifetime of not doing so. My grandmother Frances remains my rock. We talk on the phone 3 or 4 times a week and have dinner together every Sunday I can. She tells me my grandfather would be proud of how I handled all this, that I maintained my dignity and principles even under extreme pressure. I hope she's right. I hope that from wherever he is, he knows his last gift wasn't just the money, but the opportunity to finally free myself from a toxic family dynamic that had been hurting me my whole life.